Good. We're back live at Pine Cottage in Ojai, California, the Krishnamurti Center. And this slot is intended to showcase some of the podcasts that we have been recording over the last year, I would say, and also to introduce the whole team, or not all of the team, but a big part of our team, who has been working and producing it. Of course, Henry has been the main producer, but Francisco has done a lot also on it. And Leah, Gianni, and myself, we have done a lot on the content and being part of it and preparing content. And I just want to say a few minutes, talk a few minutes about what we were trying to do with this podcast. So we feel, or I feel, I think I'd like to talk about me so that other people can express a different opinion if they want. So I really felt that there are many aspects of Krishnamurti's work that would inform or contribute to the discussions that are going on in the public domain actually at the moment with various podcasts or the various discussions that are happening. And so we want to insert questions like time or duality or hope, the issue with hope and despair. And so all these, the questions around that, we feel we wanted to insert that into the discussion that's going on. There were other people discussing these topics. So we looked at people who we feel are somehow would have an appreciation for Krishnamurti's work. We've looked for known people who somehow have an appreciation for Krishnamurti's work and will be willing to explore with us those questions, and where they can somehow, from their point of view, look at at the particular questions, and we can contribute also from a personal point of view, but also from Krishnamurti's point of view, put a certain light, a certain angle on those situations. And we've done quite a few, as you have just heard. We started with Gabor Mate. We just premiered that podcast, which I felt was a very important one, or a very interesting one for myself to do. And I did it with Francisco Mazza, who's also sitting here with me. We did one. We started with one with Rupert Sheldrake, I think. We did that with Gianni. Then we had, I feel, with Byron Katie. I think, and Leah and me, we talked with Byron Katie, who's of course here in Ojai. And the last one was with, not the last one, but then the next one was with
Rupert Spira.
Rupert Spira, yeah. We did actually two with Rupert Spira. And all these, what you will see if you see the full version. So we're gonna watch short clips of these podcasts, short clips of our interactions, to showcase some of what we've done. But in order to appreciate what I would recommend, or not recommend, but I would say, if you want to get a more complete feeling of what's happening during these podcasts, then you have to watch more of it. But some of the things that I would say that for me came out is, first of all, not everybody is aware of Krishnamurti's work in depth as we are, obviously, because it's our bread and butter. We work day in, day out with the material. And then on top of that, there's often also in the course of the various people that we met, like semantic issues, like the word self will be used in different meanings by different people. In the Krishnamurti context, it's the self, it's the conditioned self, the personal self. With Byron Katie, she would talk about also for a different self. And then Rupert Spira would have a completely different definition of self. So in a lot of the discussions, you will see there's always a kind of, we have to be really attentive and help to clarify when this misunderstanding rises in the discussion on that we in the end actually talk about a semantic difference, a definition difference, and not so much about a content difference. And so that was one of the things that was interesting to see. So I feel that's a summary of it, and then I would like to maybe first go to the Gabor Mate discussion, because you've just seen that, and we would like to reflect upon it. And Francisco, who's here, Francisco Mazza, he's of course the director of development and marketing. I would like to ask him, maybe he can start off, maybe you can start off just going into how it was for you and what came out for you during this particular podcast.
Yeah, so I think for me the most relevant factor regarding this interview with Gabor Mate was the connection that we made, and we knew that he was going to go there, between the personal and maybe the impersonal is the word, something that maybe another way of saying it is something that is beyond the self, something that maybe Kay would call that differently. But I thought it was very important to see if there is a way to align the personal aspect of ourselves, which is usually, or to some extent is troubled, traumatized even to at certain level, different people, different type of traumas. But then if that aspect of ourself is not resolved, as it were, the person, and we can discuss a little bit more what that means, then to try to understand or connect with the spiritual aspect. I don't know how to call it. It's always very difficult. Kate sometimes doesn't give a name to that. But it could be seen as you could feel it almost as bypassing the personal, which is really where the feeling maybe is almost like stuck. The sense of yourself is not complete, and maybe an emotional aspect of ourselves is also cut off. So I thought that was one of an important aspect of this interview. I mean, Kay sometimes mentions the heart, which it can be also used in a strange way. But what does it mean to go through this exploration and to come from the heart as opposed to just an intellectual understanding?
Yeah, I would like to reaffirm that. That's also one of the big dangers, right? Like I feel if you read Krishnamurti and it becomes very cerebral, it becomes really like, okay, a reduction into concepts and then a kind of battle with different concepts, change them, put them in different sequences. So I think Gabor Mate really pointed to that aspect, right? So how can you have explorations or dialogues or a kind of learning where where there's a balance between like a rigorous looking at what's happening and at the same time staying connected on a heart level or on a feelings level, knowing, hey, in connection with your emotional life instead of a kind of abstraction level. Huh?
Yeah. And also, apart from what you mentioned, Jaap, about each exploration to connect with that aspect of ourselves. Also, what does it mean to unlock something that maybe from childhood has been, either it's that we lost touch with it, whatever that is, and I just have the feeling, and Gabor Mate mentioned that somehow we have learned to not feel specific things, and then explain that aspect of ourselves, almost explain it away with rationality and sometimes with spirituality, and never really getting in contact with that.
Anybody else who wants to say something about the Gabor Mate interview? You feel like, hey, it would be good to bring out. And can we go to Rupert Sheldrake? It's a good moment, I feel. Yeah. So we're going to play in a moment the Rupert Sheldrake interview. But before we do, I have one. Not everybody might know Rupert Sheldrake and its relationship with Krishnamurti. Rupert Sheldrake is known in in popular science more as the morphologic resonance, where he say birds learn something in one place and then they learn it everywhere else. And that's coming up also, I think, in the clip that we chose, where he, where Rupert Sheldrake talks about how important that, why Krishnamurti found him interesting, because he talked about, if you look at Krishnamurti's work, he would say, yeah, if one person learns something, then the whole humanity sees it, right? So there's some kind of. The other thing that why we also were really interested in it, because there's a video series that Krishnamurti did that's actually recorded in this exactly same room with Rupert Sheldrake and some others. Where I forgot
the Nature of the Mind.
And so that's the Nature of the Mind series.
Yeah.
And we wanted actually to, in that podcast, to discourse more with him. So what, 40 years after this recording, which is for people who are interested in Krishnamurti quite an important series, because it talks about Krishnamurti's view on psychology and a kind of new kind of psychology. And we wanted to hear from Rupert, so how was he thinking on it? Now, I don't think we really got that out of him fully. I think he stayed more on the kind of traditional level, but I would like to show it, and then Gianni was there, joined the podcast, and we can explore a little bit more after the podcast. Is that a good point? Yep.
So, Dean, are we ready to show? Okay.
Well, I liked Krishnamurti. We got on very well. I think we became good friends, and I think that I enjoyed talking to him, because I like talking about these things, and also I quite enjoy talking to people when we have a difference of opinion, and when it's possible to have a conversation, a discussion. I don't say debate, because debates are where one side wins and the other side loses, and it wasn't that. It was a genuine dialogue. And one of his standard lines in his talks was, "Come, sir, let us discuss it together." So I took him literally. I took him up on it. And I think one of the reasons that it wasn't just me seeking out Krishnamurti. I was being invited by people like Mary Zimbalist and Pupil Jayaka in India, and the people at Brockwood Park in England, to take part in these dialogues with him. I mean, I was always going because I was invited. And the reason he was interested in me was because in 1981, my book, A New Science of Life, had just come out about the idea of morphic resonance. And Krishnamurti liked the idea that all humanity is interconnected, something that happens in one person. He used to say, "I am humanity."
Gianni, you were there, and so how do you look back on the questions and the kind of things that we explored there?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was very interesting overall to sort of hear Rupert's experience and hear some of the stories that he had, both here from the Nature of the Mind dialogue, but also over in India. And I thought he did touch upon morphic resonance, and which is a very interesting concept to me, because certainly we are familiar with Krishnamurti's work in the sense of, the individual and society and the sort of interplay between the two, right? You are the world. And to go along with that, I mean, I forget the name of it right now, but there was a dialogue with Bohm where they were discussing, and they were saying, a scientist doesn't have their own bit of salt, their own unique salt in a lab that they test on. Salt is salt. And so in these explorations, in these dialogues, we're getting at something that is fundamental and universal in that sense. And so I think the concept of something like morphic resonance, really makes us have to pause and look at the connection between the individual and the collective. And we know certainly that in terms of all of our own consciousnesses, that there is this deep interconnection, this deep interplay. And so, hearing both him speak about that, but then also, the sort of behind the scenes kind of things about it, and saying that, being approached by Mary Zimbalist and others, to come and participate in these dialogues, and that he had this book out and this idea out. And so for me, what that really affirms is that in order for these explorations to have a living sort of element or quality, it isn't just a sort of, well, I'm going to work on my own theory and, individually or by myself and sort of sit down at my desk and write it all out and make my magnum opus and put it out there and then, battle everyone against my thesis. So hearing him share that, it really kind of brought it all around for me in terms of what the project of the podcast is, which is to get these different speakers and explore. They all have their own backgrounds, as we all do as individuals when we just meet together as for dialogue. But I thought that was very interesting, especially when you consider it in the context of the individual's relationship with society.
Yeah, I think what stood out for me was Rupert is quite a traditionalist in many ways, right? Regarding to his religion, he had his own guru, he said at the time, or his own whatever it was, and is very much into chanting. Has written whole books about the importance of tradition. And then you have Krishnamurti, who is almost on that perspective completely polar opposite. But I feel in that way it speaks a bit for Krishnamurti that he was open to keep exploring with Rupert Sheldrake, even inviting him in order to bring out, so it was not a closed door. It was not a requirement. Oh, you have to believe what Krishnamurti says and accept that, and then you can come to the door or something. And that I enjoyed that, hearing that.
Yeah, and if I could also pick up on something that you just said, which I think was a part of when Rupert was talking about why he was interested in chanting. And there's other things in sort of, group meditation and some other things that were along those lines. But in something in chanting, I remember what kind of came out of that was this sense of, individual voices joining as one. And there's this sort of communion that happens through chanting and, that group experience. And so, we may, we don't have to dive into that and start, picking it apart or anything like that. But I do wonder about the quality of communion. And, if we're saying, and I guess it doesn't strike me as altogether all that surprising that somebody who's worked as much as he has on a concept like morphic resonance would look to things, like that, right? In a way that individual voices can sort of join as one and have this sort of communal experience simultaneously together. And so I wonder, though, I try to think about that and try to think about in what way, Krishnamurti's views on the individual and society, and whether, there's a big thing about connection. Is connection possible? Is love possible? Is relationship possible? And, we wonder, well, what do we mean by relationship if communion is not a part of that?
Yeah. How would you answer that?
Exactly. I don't think that there is relationship separated from communion. Aristotle had his definitions of the different types of relationships, right? And there was one that was the motive, right? And so that's sort of, you can scratch my back and I'll scratch your back, and, it's good business for both of us, And then there's also the one that's, based upon pleasure, right? So we both play poker and we have a great time, or we go fishing together, and maybe that's the only thing that we do together, but when, we have these shared activities that we both like. But then there was one that, the last one was, he described what we would translate into English as the good. And it was one in which the relationship between the two people was one that was a sincere sort of bettering of the other, without any sort of attachment of gain or even security, in the sense that if it's truly a gift or truly a communion, there's not a sense of reciprocity that is expected. And so I wonder in that, that, in friendship is relationship, that isn't pointing to something like that there is this communion that can occur in friendship or relationship, but perhaps it is one lost among a sea of others that sort of muddy the waters in terms of, feeling whether we have that communion in our daily life.
So you mean that what Socrates was talking about it, or Plato?
Aristotle.
Aristotle, yeah.
Sorry, I was just thinking, I mean, it still makes you wonder if these communal activities that Rupert Sheldrake mentioned, if communion, communal. Yeah, so how does that relate to what Kay is actually talking about? Because it does feel that they are not the same to me. It does feel like from separation to then get together is really not what Kay talks about. It's really, he's looking at, Kay feels to me that he's looking at the transformation first somehow, and then the shared experience is not that the different selves are sharing a particular experience. They are coming from the same place, almost, as it were. So it's just, I just found that
like a kind of relationship that's not based on appearances in some way, or a relationship that's not, that's of a different dimension almost.
Right. Yep.
Right? Not quantifiable, measurable.
But could those activities facilitate that communion?
That's a great
good question.
I think that's a question I still have. I don't know the answer. It feels to me like Krishnamurti was pointing to something that was not dependent on any activity, almost like what John Duncan was saying earlier today, of just something that's free as it is, or meeting what's actually happening. So I don't know that it would be dependent, but at the same time, it seems like some environments are conducive to deeper inquiry with others. So it's still a question I have.
Well, we're in one, aren't we?
Yeah. So, and the next one is Byron Katie, maybe was the next one. Yeah. So.
Or is it Eisenstein?
Eisenstein. Yeah, Charles Eisenstein. Yeah.
We had left him out originally. Yeah.
Yes. Good. So we did that together, right?
Mm-hmm.
Charles, you want to introduce Charles Eisenstein for people who don't know him and who are watching that?
Yeah, I mean, he's a writer and a speaker, and it came out in our podcast and also in his own work. Kind of one of the reasons, there's obviously a connection between the work that they've done and the theme around the podcast where we end up speaking. But we focus primarily on emergent qualities we focused on human beings, but the emergent properties sort of in its principle. And just to set up this clip that we're going to watch a little bit, we were speaking about, why don't we change, right? That was really the big question, I think, of the whole episode there. So yeah, that sets up the clip nicely.
Good.
So we all set, Dean, to roll? Yeah.
And so I wonder if there's something in this exploration and there's something in this expansion that really begins with observation. And I think it's very difficult for us to merely observe, because as soon as something sort of pops up for me, I feel the impulse to condemn it or to sort of congratulate myself for it. And so I was just wondering, in the context of this discussion, in this context of emergent sort of properties, when we're talking about the expansion of awareness, where is the role of sort of control or judgment or analysis in these things? Because certainly we don't want to toss, the baby out with the bathwater, but certainly we can see the sort of amount of energy that can be sort of wasted in this process.
Yes. So the response of condemnation, or would be the opposite of condemnation, approval. That reflex to respond to some piece of information, some observation in that way, that itself is generated by a psychological condition that has a impediment, as you were saying before, built into it. It's coming, or another way to put it is that it's the playing out of psychological forces that are generated by a wound. The wound being of self-rejection. So condemnation affirms you as somebody who wouldn't do that. It puts you in a superior moral position and gives you a reason to like yourself, basically, a reason to accept yourself, and helps you identify yourself as being on the other side of what you're condemning. What that prevents you from seeing, and this is well, for one thing, it prevents you from accurately discerning the set of conditions that are generating what you are condemning. And it also short circuits that faculty of mind, which actually wants to operate in a different way and is being channeled toward condemn or approve. And that faculty of mind is the faculty of making distinctions.
Yeah. Gianni, is there something you would like to?
Yeah, what I find particularly interesting, because I hadn't seen the Gabor Mate podcast until today, and just the amount of time that was spent in that dialogue going over wounds and hurt, and to now remember this podcast that we had where Eisenstein was saying about that motion or that movement internally can happen even upon the self-inflicted wounds, right? Of immediately trying to get onto the other side of it. And I mean, you didn't even have to say the word division, right? Because, to condemn or to move over, is putting that space and making that divide and saying, I'm not this type of person or I'm not that type of person. And, I did like when he, used the term, short circuit and the sort of the pathway that, because it does have, sort of an energetic sort of image when you think about that, in terms of you have this energy in examining something, and it immediately sort of short circuits to feel a certain way about it, to get to move away from it in a way where, or not in a way, but from a place of reducing the wound, or in the pain of the wound, I'm going to move away and say, oh, that wasn't me back there. That's not me. That's, I'm not that type of person, or whatever it may be.
Yeah, I think that condemnation is a good example of how difficult it is to look at ourselves, right? To face ourselves, because actually, if we already have that set of values of who we should be, I should be, then it's, I like it when a certain thing comes out that I feel proud about, or the opposite, if I can't stand something or I shouldn't be something, so then I put it down. And it somehow that, shows a light on how difficult observation of who we are, how the challenges of that, right? Don't know if you want to see you nodding, Henry, you want to...
No, I'm just agreeing with you.
Oh.
I thought you said that.
Okay,
first.
Yeah, and so one thing that was for me, that doesn't come out in this particular clip, but came out for me in this podcast, because so we read various articles of Charles Eisenstein, and we saw various clips, and he so he said, so because the question was, how do we change, right? And how does a better society come about? And I was trying to zoom in how does he envision, like, how the world is at the moment, and how the world would go into a different place. And in his writings, he uses the word choice, as if there was something like, okay, we need to make better choices, as if we are more informed or something. And of course, I put the question out from Krishnamurti's work. If you look at Krishnamurti's work, I mean, choice. Where there's choice, there is no freedom, right? Because when there's choice, there is when there's choice, there's confusion. Somehow when you have insight, you act as a different action. But so I want to drive him more clearly into somehow clarifying the word choice. But I remember, and that was like a semantic, and then maybe the podcast is too short. I didn't take enough time to explain more clearly. I did explain it somewhat, but not clearly enough. Because there's a whole depth, the word choice is there's so much Krishnamurti has said, and to put that in a succinct way that you in one shot see this, oh wow, yeah, this is what the limitations of choice are, because it's so natural for us to say, if there are two options, choose the better option, and that seems to be the better way forward. But Krishnamurti says, well, when there's choice, there is confusion. And I felt, when I put that to Charles, I didn't feel that I were able to bring that out sufficiently enough. And it fell, yeah, I felt that was a moment. So, and that shows somehow for me, like if I pull back the challenges that we have in these podcasts, because somehow we have to, I don't want to take an hour to explain one concept of K and put all the angles of it. So you have to have in 10 seconds or in 30 seconds or a minute, you have to somehow explain in the full extent how certain words are being used, and that they're not used in the same way that we're normally using them.
Yes, I agree. And talking about the challenges that we face, I feel that the terminology and semantics, that's a big one. But also, I mean, we're still aiming at having an exploration with the people that we are interviewing, and that's been also quite hard. We have discussed this in the past. We get a sense of a question is put forward, and then some of them come with the answer, as it were, that already made, as opposed to kind of engaging with us in some kind of exploration. It's really tricky, because what we're asking from them is what we ask ourselves, like how to start almost from a place of not knowing, and how to talk from it as opposed to about it. But that's been I feel like it's quite a challenge in almost all of the interviews that we have had.
Well, it's an unusual request, right? Because you go on a podcast to listen to someone who you want to learn something from. Yeah. So I think it can be difficult to switch out of that mode, or even for myself, when I think about when someone asks me a question, I go back in my memory and my knowledge, and I want to answer them. But to ask someone who's an expert about something, or a professional, what does this mean? And right. As if you're hearing it for the first time, I think is very, not only difficult, but strange, a strange request.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I feel like some of them, I've frankly, with Gabor Mate, I felt that we got closer to that space, and with others, maybe I shouldn't mention who, we were a bit more far away from it.
Yeah, I think we can make the transition now to Byron Katie. First of all, I just some interesting circumstances because of COVID, of course. So the podcasts are all through Zoom, right? Zoom or some kind of other technology. But Byron Katie is just, around the corner. I jokingly said at the beginning of the podcast, I could open the window and shout at you, right? It's not completely true because he's here on the other side of the hill, but nevertheless. So that was an interesting aspect. And I don't know, Leah, do you want to, before the video starts, say something?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of nonverbal communication that happens, even just sitting down with someone and being close to them. So we did miss that aspect, but we did the best that we could given the circumstances, and I think it turned out pretty well. Well, Krishnamurti has a quote about negation that reminds me a lot about the work. He says, we posit the positive and then get caught in the negative. One must begin with doubt, completely doubting, then you end up with certainty. But if you start with certainty, then you end up in uncertainty and chaos. So in negation, the positive is born. And that really reminded me of the questions, the work, because it seems like that this is a call for challenging these mental pictures that are coming up and what we call time and concept. And
very good.
Yeah. And so I think what I really want to know is just how you see that process of distillation, and taking our illusions and challenging them and meeting them. And I'm not really sure if that's a question, but I just kind of saw a link there.
It really comes to bear when we witness how we react when we believe the thought, and how often there's that word that Krishnamurti used that you began with, what was the word?
Was it certainty?
Unconditionally free.
Yeah. How do we react when we believe the thought? It shows we're invested in what we're thinking and believing, those past future illusions that go on in our head. And we say and do things that cause guilt, and that's built in because it is a no. Mm-hmm. And no one can escape that. If I say or do anything that would harm you or me, there's a guilt to it. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter how the mind justifies the action. Mm. There's a guilt to it. And so that would be a worksheet, a judge and neighbor worksheet.
And what is the origin of that guilt? What is that? Why is the brain organized that way that it brings?
My nature is to love unconditionally.
Mm-hmm. Ah, okay.
So anything in opposition to that, is going to be, as Krishnamurti says, what you're up against. What you're up. It's gonna bounce back and remind you you have a little work to do.
Leah, do you want to kick off?
So I think we're so used to not just going with our thoughts, but saying things like, I am a good person, or I am impressive, or making all of these assertions and as cases positing the positive. And it, as we can see, kind of just leads to chaos. And I saw some parallels between that Krishnamurti quote and Byron Katie's the work, which is these 4 questions, which is really her process of, I think, self-inquiry and getting to the truth. That reminded me a lot of Kay's teachings, actually. And I think that there's something different that happens when you just stop to ask yourself, is love desire? Okay, no, it's not that. Is love pleasure? Okay, no, it's not that. And somehow starting from that leads you to somewhere else than starting from, love is this. And it's, I just like to add that I think that invites curiosity, I think.
Yeah, I thought the big challenge, or the big, a little bit to adding to what you're saying, the big challenge is somehow to bring out, like if you have roamed around in Krishnamurti's work long enough, anything that smells or looks like method or a worksheet, you feel you're compelled to have to stay away, and in this case you might question, well, if you systematically ask yourself, is this true, that there might be a use for that. So actually to open the discussion on what will be the pitfalls by having asking yourself rigorously when you believe something, like you have done something to me, and I ask myself, is that true? Where does that work and where does it not work? I feel that was for me a little bit on the background the big question, especially with Byron Katie. I don't know if we. I mean, Krishnamurti was very clear, right? In 1929, truth is a pathless land. So,
Then he would also, I think he mentioned a few times, I think it's at Brockwood, with students to write down your thoughts, right? To write, maybe not as a method, but some kind of pointer or help to feedback and see how your mind operates. So a question like, is it true? To some, it could work. It could have that same, coming back and bringing the uncertainty back to you.
Yeah, and he would also talk about meditation. He would say to the heads of school, there needs to be quiet time in the school. It needs to be. And in Brockwood, I remember he was insisting originally on half an hour, and I think in the end, with the whole organization of the school, they only managed 10 minutes a day. But that was for him a very important aspect, right? And you could say, well, is there a method in that? But you don't hear Krishnamurti saying, ask certain questions, right? Although maybe there are some questions that he's repeatedly asking, but he doesn't formalize that. Yeah.
Perhaps the quality of the question changes when the question is something like, why don't you look? And I think that there may be an important difference between a certain type of method that is a little bit more on the rails rather than just sort of pointing out or asking, why don't you take that space to sit quietly and to not even, go, all the extra steps of you must sit in this posture and you must, not have any thoughts really, I think, it is speaking or asking or imploring one to use one's attention. Is that a method, or is it just sort of, it's too broad to be considered a method, is it just, like breathe air,
Yeah, good. Anybody has to add something? Or?
Well, I think we're starting to poke away, and there's a number of challenges and a number of things that come up with these podcasts and interviewing all of these people. Questions probably from our audience: why, even at the Krishnamurti Foundation, would you interview these people? What really is meant by, because we're 100% about the dissemination, preservation of Krishnamurti's teachings. So, and what are those? What does that mean? What are those teachings? Are they method free? Is the questioning of authority a method? Is exploring for oneself, a method? So just so many things these bring up. And I think before we go to the final clip, it's that I think there's something important about not shying away from relationship and all the ways it shows up in the world. These are people with different point of views. Some of them are public speakers. Some might be considered by other spiritual teachers. I mean, people might say, why are you, getting involved with all that? I think it's because you can't avoid life. I mean, there's no place to hide from it. So why not sort of dive in and try to explore with everyone together? And I think that's the spirit. And we're also kind of learning as we go. We're hearing feedback from the audience that says, are you noticing this? Or the next clip we're going to watch with Rupert Spira was a bit more of a kind of a controversial one because Jaap and I were representing a little of questioning, but it almost started to have the taste of becoming a position because on the other side, Rupert, where it's coming from is hard to tell, but tends to make more affirmations about what the truth is. And as Jaap said, when that's put out there, as a person interested in Krishnamurti, you're tempted to question that because that's the gift, I think, or that's what Krishnamurti offered. So this podcast that you see was challenging. We did do a follow-up one that is coming out May 11th that they're releasing. So it has a different flavor, but we'll show you and you'll get a taste.
I want to, before we go into Rupert Spira, because the preparation, as I said, with Rupert Sheldrake, so we had the series, the mind,
the nature of the mind.
The nature of the mind. Yeah, sorry. But with Rupert Spira, because he's supposed, he calls himself a non-duality teacher, right? That's on his website. That's why we looked at it, and we were specifically also seeking out people who represent a certain aspect which is for us interesting to engage with. And it's going to be horrible with names because the next name is even more horrible. But okay, I'm gonna. So I was really taken by the discussion that Krishnamurti had with Swami V.K. We called him, but it's Swami Vigantasananda or something like that.
Pretty good.
Pretty good. And that's about Krishnamurti engaging in the question, I am dead. With the Swami, he goes into what is the validity of that question, I am dead? Because in many non-dualist teachings, that I am dead, go to the thought before all other thoughts. The thought I am is crucial. And in this transcript, Krishnamurti actually says, yeah, well, why do you say that the I am before everything is the higher self? Why don't you say the I am before everything is your a heavily conditioned human being? Why I'm ugly, I'm jealous, why are you not going there? Why are you only saying no? The I am that is before you is the higher self and not the other side, the conditioned self. And so we wanted to actually, we sent him also the transcript before we discussed to Robert. And I think some aspects came out, but I think the biggest difficulty, which will I think maybe comes out in this clip also a little bit maybe. No, I don't think it really comes out in this clip, but how I is used is differently. Krishnamurti used I really as the conditioned self, and Rupert Spira as the I, as the so-called universal I that's before all other thought. And so unless you really know how to maneuver that, it's the whole podcast can be a little bit confusing, I think. But this particular clip is about something else, I think, and we'll look at that. I remember.
Yeah. Let's roll. Are we all set, Dean, to roll?
There is something that is undeniably real. We just get into that issue of, for the Christian, God is, and just the concern is does doubt of everything. I mean, I does it do something to our relationships, to our openness to life itself? Maybe I can. This is a good time to ask a question from the Peanut Gallery. We have two people in the Peanut Gallery here, and okay. one is Vincent Hernandez, who's met you a number of times, and he's a residential student with us right now. And this applies to what we're all talking about. Mm-hmm. He says, or asks, can the recognition of our being bring us the feeling of I am enlightened too soon, and not delve deeply into the mind? This sense of comfort in this recognition may not allow us to come to what Krishnamurti calls the immeasurable. What do you have to say to that?
I think if we go in ourselves to the experience to which we refer when we say simply I am, before I am is qualified by experience, we find that is immeasurable. In fact, it is the only element of experience that is immeasurable. Everything else is measurable in some form, but to go to the experience to which we refer when we say I am, that is the immeasurable.
Yeah, Henry.
You want me to tackle that?
Yeah, tackle that one, yeah.
I think there's something, not unlike when Kay's pointing to the other that is being pointed to there. It's just challenging to know what to do with that. It's challenging to know what to do with statements that we make to one another. Do we ponder them intellectually? How do we look at what's being pointed to there? And I think the real gift that kind of Krishnamurti brought, and like you said, Francisco, we're trying to get into with the podcast, is what it means to explore something and what it means to listen to another person. And it's so quickly glossed over, but the power of actually listening, and I mean, that was a big topic actually in your Gabor Mate podcast. It's challenging to know how listening and affirmative statements work together, but I think that listening challenges affirmative statements, and it almost substitutes them with more what you were pointing to as communion, where we're meeting at the same energy. We're following along with one another. Maybe we understand each other, but we're not actually intellectualizing. You could call it speaking from the heart or something like that. So again, we keep pointing out, I think, in all these clips, we see these challenges of actually having a conversation with another person. And I think Krishnamurti in his teachings was always asking us, was always pointing toward what relationship actually is. And I think these podcasts are a good example of we each come in with maybe different ideas, different approaches. We don't know one another. Maybe there's a fear of how we're coming across on the podcast, or all that stuff's happening. And over time, what we're really seeming to try to do is to actually relate in a fundamentally different way, to explore what it means to gather energy together rather than just further an idea. And so I think the whole project, you can't see it as we're not going to achieve success necessarily here, or I think the failure would be to not try to challenge ourselves, to try to look at what does it mean to listen, what does it mean to explore together, what does it mean to be attentive. So that's what I really have to say to Rupert's, to the points there. Not to get too specifically, I mean, you could watch the podcast to really see the specifics of it. But that's kind of what I want to bring out is kind of what's behind all of the exchanges that we've been having on the podcast and behind all of our exchanges with each other, and how we can just do something that has a different quality.
Yes, and I feel that challenge is also the challenge that we have within ourselves, right? Like how to listen to each other and how to not translate everything into this map of myself and reality, everything, this is the way I feel. And so I think that's the most important thing, how to be able to, again, be in contact with an aspect of ourselves that is more experiential than the narrative aspect. And that is happening in conversation, but that is happening also when I'm on my own, talking to myself probably, and doing the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's something like what I've learned, and that's of course not new, but that when you really strongly start making affirmative statement, the space shrinks, right? It's almost like you have an open space, but when you say it's this or it's that, it's almost because, or you have to start challenging that, and that's then becomes a debate or an argument, or and so if it's possible to move like tentatively, could it be this or could it be that, and so that you make you keep it together. It's a question for each. Then it's like it expands, right? And suddenly you're all included because you don't have to counter-argue something. It's just like it's put out as a question. And because the big challenge in the non-dualist challenge, I felt was that the question that we're trying to tackle is, is there a thought, or is there a sense, or is there something before all thought that you can somehow point at, and or it's all conjured up, or can thought point at something, or is that just a different dimension? So you cannot just say this is beyond. Like I'm going in myself, I close my eyes, and I can say, well, these thoughts are superficial thoughts. These are my thoughts. It's my ego thoughts. But there's the other one, and that is outside of it. So, and I feel that is for me the big conundrum, I think, and somehow to bring that out further. I mean, I always felt that Krishnamurti was categorical in that, that you can't point to the immeasurable, otherwise it would be measurable, It doesn't mean that the immeasurable is not there, but it's not experienceable or to be pointed at or something. That would, yeah. Yeah, so we have a few more minutes, and I felt there's one thing at least I want to bring out if we somehow at a good place here. Also. So what are the plans for coming up? And I have shared with we're of course all the time having brainstorms. Who shall we invite, or where shall we focus on? And we have different camps, or where we all are, because we all of us, we have our own interests. And my interest is actually education, and I feel because not many people know, but my background, I came into Krishnamurti because of education, and I've been a teacher at the Brockwood Park School for many years when I was 30. And at that time, I went really deep into all the discussions Krishnamurti had with all the students and the staff, and how to create the educational environment. And I was and I am still very passionate, and I'm actually somehow a little bit sad or something that actually the amazing things that are woven into those talks with staff and students haven't really come out. It's like because it's not like, if you read a talk, it's really on one topic, but when it's these 3-hour discussions with teachers, you have to find where it's interesting. He tries to meet their particular issues on that day, and tries to first meet them actually as they are, and then go to the bigger picture. So what I'm hoping is that in the coming months, I want to take some of these transcripts and take one transcript and discuss that with one of the former head of schools of Brockwood, of India, and here in Ojai, and go through these transcripts and see what it meant for them. Some have been participant in those discussions, and tomorrow Gianni has a presentation on a whole set of those discussions, actually. So that's of the book Unconditioning and Education, and some of the participants of that discussion will be also there. So I feel I have my personal focus, and which is partially and also the foundation focus. Bringing out that work is really where I'm enthusiastic on. I don't know if any of you want to say what your thoughts are.
No, I mean, the only thing for me is try to keep it diverse, because as you said, we all have a different interest, and not to kind of narrow it down specifically to one or two people that they like this thing and all that. I have also my own interests, but the only thing would be just education will be part of it. Probably some people like Gabor Mate, which is about psychology and science and all that. As long as we keep it diverse, I'm happy moving forward.
Yeah, I think continuing to attempt to look at these things together and to learn together would be one of the main things that I would like to focus on.
Yeah, and I think it's just provides such an opportunity for us, staff at the center, and also people affiliated around our community and also out on the internet, to kind of interact and realize that we're all in this together. I mean, it's not one person's an expert or one person's not. The exploration is it's shared, and until it's really shared, maybe change it isn't really, the urgency's missed, or opportunities missed. So, all of these things that you suggest sound great. And even Jaap, when you're talking about education now, it's as if even when we have a conversation like this, that's what builds and creates the podcast. So it's coming from the actual discussions we have together and the spirit of listening to those discussions.
Time's up. Good. Thank you very much.